Hey guys, welcome back to World of Tanks. My name is Bruce and today I want to present the best tech trees in World of Tanks. If you ask yourself which tech tree is most fun to play, then this video is for you. Let's go. World of Tanks offers more than 60 different tech trees from 11 different nations. As Wargaming is updating and balancing all those tanks frequently, all those tech trees have changed a lot since they were introduced into the game. In this video I will present the best tech trees, the ones that are most fun to play in 2024. Those tech trees I recommend in this video are not based on my subjective playstyle or opinion, but on the current World of Tanks server statistics. So you get an objective view of the best tech trees so that when you start grinding them, they do let you enjoy the game. So as I said, I don't give you a subjective opinion. In fact, I calculated the best tech trees and therefore I use data from WoT, a website which shows the overall World of Tanks server statistic. I use the data from the last 30 days and the WN8 of every tech tree tank from tier 5 till tier 10. Now, due to the fact that you need much more XP to unlock and play a tier 9 tank compared to a tier 5 tank, I weighted the WN8 of each tier starting from tier 5. Because we all know if a tier 5 or tier 6 tank is scrap, then this is not too much of a problem because it just doesn't take so long to unlock the succeeding tank. But if you have to work yourself through a crappy tier 9 tank, for example, then this really limits the fun factor and the game experience towards the desired tier 10 tank. Hence it is much more important that a top tier tank performs well than it is vice versa. Okay, so as I said, I took all the WN8 values from WoT for every tech tree tank from tier 5 until tier 10. Keep in mind that lots of tech trees share the same tier 5, sometimes even tier 6, 7 or 8 tank, and thus are only differentiate between the value for the tier 9 and tier 10 tank. Those values again are from the official World of Tanks statistic from the last 30 days because it is important that the statistic is not falsified by statistics before the last nerf or buff of one or the other tank. And so I get this wonderful list. Here you can see the respective nation, then here you can see the tier 10 tank of the respective tech tree, the tank class, and then here's the value for the respective tier. So the WN8 from WoT for tier 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. And this is the weighting factor that I used in my calculation. So then I get simply the average value of this whole calculation. So I multiply the tier 5 WN8 value with this weighting factor, so with 1, and then I add this value multiplied by 2 and so on and so forth. And then here at the end I get this average value, and this basically shows me how good the respective tech tree is. So the overall best tech tree when it comes to heavy tanks is the one which leads to the American T110E5 with an overall WN8 of 1392. This tech tree is great because most of the tanks recently got buffed by Wargaming. The T1 Heavy starts with an astonishing 1191 WN8. The M6 is, I think, can be considered as being OP with an WN8 of 1824. The T29 is still a decent tank, a hull-down monster, a WN8 of 1051. The Tier 8 also got buffed, achieves a WN8 of 1148. Even the M103, which used to be kind of a crappy tank, got buffed and achieves now a WN8 of 1267, and the T110E5 achieves 1710 and can be considered as one of the best heavy tanks in the game. It also got buffed by Wargaming, so this line is pretty consistent and all those tanks perform nicely in the game. Hence, this is the best performing tech tree when it comes to heavy tanks. The second best heavy tank tech tree is the British one, which leads to the Super Conqueror. And all those tanks have been buffed recently. Now the tier 5, 6 and 7 tank are still not the best ones on their respective tier. However, they now perform average to slightly above average. The Churchill 1 with 807 WN8, the Churchill 7 with 983, and the Black Prince with 1065. Now, those tanks starting from tier 8 to tier 10, those tanks perform exceptionally well, and this is why the overall value of 1389 is achieved. The Carnarvon can be considered as one of the best tier 8 tech tree tanks on the server, at least when it comes to heavy tanks, with an WN8 value of 1102. The tier 9 Conqueror is even better with 1407, and the tier 10 Super Conqueror is a behemoth of a tank with an WN8 of 1811. So the more you progress on this tech tree, the better it gets, and the tier 8 is fantastic, the tier 9 and tier 10 are fantastic. So this is the reason why this tech tree is the second best when it comes to heavy tanks. The third best heavy tank tech tree in World of Tanks as of now is the one which leads to the BZ75, so the Chinese heavy tank tech tree. This one, compared to the British one, offers tanks which are, when it comes to the top tier tanks, not quite as good as the British ones. However, on the other side, the tier 5, tier 6 and tier 7 tanks perform better. So this tech tree achieves an overall WN8 of 1355, so a tiny touch worse compared to the tech tree of the Super Conqueror. But the Type T34 achieves a WN8 of 1210. Same goes for the Type 58. And then the BZ58 on tier 7 achieves 1070. The BZ166 1033. The BZ68 on tier 9 achieves 1342. And then the BZ75 performs nicely, even better than the T110E5, and achieves a WN8 of 1717. So this is the third best tech tree in terms of heavy tanks. Number 4 in World of Tanks, at least when it comes to heavy tanks, is the French one, which leads to the MX50B. I know that those tanks are pretty tough to play, but they offer an exceptionally great firepower with the autoloader guns. Chances are that those tanks are more often played by the above average player, but if you know how to play those tanks, they perform exceptionally well. So this tech tree achieves an overall WN8 of 1351. It starts with the superb tier 5 tank, the BDR G1B, which achieves 1272 WN8. The tier 6 one is also nice with 1080. The tier 7 achieves 1053. The tier 8 is kind of the weak spot with only 982, but the tier 9 with 1304 and the tier 10 with 1794 perform really nicely. This tech tree has also been buffed a couple of months ago, and now the French heavy tanks really perform great. Number 5 of the best tech trees in World of Tanks when it comes to heavy tanks is the Russian one, or the Soviet one I should say, which leads to the ST2. Those tanks have also been buffed, at least the ST2, and they perform really nicely. So it starts off with the tier 5 tank with the KV1, which achieves a WN8 of 1041. The T150 is even better with 1134. The KV3 achieves 932. The IS-22 achieves 930, and the IS-32 achieves 1328. The SC2, which got buffed recently, is even better and achieves a WN8 of 1735. When it comes to medium tanks, the best tech tree currently in World of Tanks is the one which leads to the CS63. This tech tree gets an overall WN8 of 1318. It starts with the tier 5 tank, the DSPZINZ, or however you call this tank, which achieves an WN8 of 928. The tier 6 boogie is pretty strong and achieves a WN8 of 1049. The tier 7 is even better with 1170. The tier 8 is kind of the low performer in this tech tree, achieving 951. But then the tier 9 tank is strong with 1290, and the CS63 is a superb tier 10 tank. Maybe due to its turbine and its exceptionally great mobility, it achieves a WN8 of 1715. So this tech tree performs nicely and is the best tech tree currently in World of Tanks when it comes to medium tanks. The second best medium tech tree in World of Tanks currently is the Chinese one, which leads to the 121. This tech tree achieves an overall WN8 of 1315. It starts off with the tier 5 tank that I already described. So once again, the type T34 achieves 1210. Same goes for the type 58. And then the T34-1 achieves 1095. The T34-2 achieves 1038. The WZ-120 achieves 1253, and the 121 achieves 1652. So all those tanks perform nicely in the game, hence you should really start playing this tech tree line. The third best medium tech tree currently in World of Tanks is the British one, which leads to the Centurion Action X. This tech tree achieves an WN8 of 1275 overall. It starts with a very weak Cavalier on tier 5, which only achieves 518. However, it gets much better on tier 6 with the Cromwell achieving 1116. The Comet achieves 902 and the Centurion 1 902 as well. I think those ones are the toughest ones on this tech tree, but then the Centurion 7-1 achieves an astonishing 1398, and the Centurion Action X, of which I just recently made a video that you might want to check out, achieves an astonishing 1660. So this tech tree is pretty consistent. From tier 8 onwards, it starts to get quite some armor. So you can play hull down, you're very flexible. Those tanks are relatively mobile, and I can really recommend this tech tree. Number 4 of the tech tree lines in terms of medium tanks in World of Tanks currently is another British one, the one which leads to the Concept 5. Now, one word of caution, I think chances are that as of now, I would say the above average players are playing this tech tree line. And so yes, it is a word of caution. This tech tree might actually drop down in the upcoming month. So this tech tree overall achieves a WN8 of 1274. It starts with a relatively weak tier 5 tank, the AEC, with 975. The stack count is not much better with only 968. The FSV Scheme Alpha achieves 1143. The Saladin achieves 1003, and the GSO 1006-7 achieves 1297. Now the Concept 5 actually achieves a WN8 of 1563, so it's performing nicely. Those tanks all have, or at least the top tier tanks have, an exceptionally weak DPM. super precise guns. They are relatively mobile, but they do not have any armor. So this tech tree is actually for the better players in World of Tanks. So yeah, once again, word of caution, don't be surprised if you play this tech tree. It appears to be that these tanks are made for better players in World of Tanks. Nonetheless, it currently performs nicely and is therefore number 4 currently in World of Tanks. Number 5 of the best tech trees currently in World of Tanks, at least when it comes to medium tanks, is a German one, and no, it is not the one to the Leopard 1, it is the one which leads to the E50M. Little spoiler, the one which leads to the Leopard 1 is only a tiny touch worse compared to this one, but this is number 5. So this tech tree achieves an overall WN8 of 1268. It starts with the relatively weak VK3001H, which only achieves 809. It gets much better with the VK3002M, which achieves 1047. The Panther is relatively weak with only 896. The Panther 2 is also not much better with 905, but the tier 9 tank is exceptionally good. It is actually the best tier 9 tank of all medium tanks currently in the game with 1493, and then the E50M on tier 10 achieves 1545. So as soon as you got rid of those, I would say, stinkers in this tech tree becomes superb and is so much fun to play, and so it achieves 5th place on my list. When it comes to tank destroyers, the best tech tree currently in World of Tanks is the Chinese one, which leads to the WZ-113 GFT. Those tanks recently got buffed in World of Tanks, and it appears that those tanks now perform pretty nicely. Plus, this tech tree is super consistent. It starts off with the tier 5 tank, the 60 GFT, which achieves 1002 and is the best tier 5 tank destroyer currently in the game. The tier 6 one achieves 1233, the second best value in the game currently. The tier 7 tank achieves 1075, also a pretty decent value. The tier 8 tank is superb, the best one currently in the game, achieving a WN8 of 1150. The tier 9 tank, once again, currently the best WN8 of all tier 9 tank destroyers with 1498. And then the tier 10 tank achieves the best overall value on its tier compared to the other tank destroyers with 1709. So all those tanks perform exceptionally good after they got buffed by Wargaming, and hence I have to recommend this tech tree. It is the best one of all tank destroyers, achieving an overall WN8 of 1411. The second best tech tree line, at least in terms of tank destroyers, is the Japanese one, which leads to the Hori 3. This one recently entered the game, and those tanks also perform great. The tier 5 one achieves a WN8 of 1000, the tier 6 one of 1019. The tier 7 one is the high performer, at least I would say one of the high performers on this tech tree line with 1390. The tier 8 achieves 1092, the tier 9 achieves 1427, the third best value of all the tier 9 tank destroyers, and the tier 10 achieves 1638, the second best value of all tier 10 tank destroyers. I think those ones can be compared to the German tech tree line, which leads to the Jagdpanzer E100. However, they are much more mobile and hence more competitive. And once again, it is a very consistent tech tree, and I can really recommend it if you are into playing tank destroyers. The third best tank destroyer tech tree line is the Italian one, which leads to the Minotauro. This one achieves an overall WN8 of 1236. It starts off with the rather weak Simovente with only 820 WN8. The tier 6 Basotto is much stronger with 1104. The tier 7 is also strong with 1086 WN8. The tier 8 is also performing nicely with 1077. The tier 9 is pretty strong with 1271. And I think good players can even get better results than this. At least that is my personal opinion. And then the Minotauro on tier 10 achieves 1433. So as you can see, those tank destroyers are also relatively consistent, at least from tier 7 onwards, simply because the playstyle is consistent. And yeah, they all perform great on the battlefield. Number 4 of all tank destroyer tech tree lines is the American one, which leads to the tier 10 T110E3. So this one achieves an overall WN8 of 1190, so not quite as good as the 3 previous ones. It starts off with the tier 5 Wolverine with the 970. The tier 6 Jackson is achieving an, I would say, astonishing 1162. The T25 AT is a bit weaker with only 931. The tier 8 T28 achieves 1048. The tier 9 T95 achieves 1298. This tank has been nerfed recently in World of Tanks. Nonetheless, it performs great. And the tier 10 T110E3 also got nerfed, but still achieves a WN8 of 1320. So despite having achieved, or having received, I should say, quite some nerfs, this tech tree line still performs nicely. And yeah, if you are into heavily armored tank destroyers, then this tech tree might be the one for you, because you have some armor, at least on tier 8, tier 9 and tier 10, and it is number 4 on my list. Number 5 of the best tech tree lines when it comes to tank destroyers currently in World of Tanks is the British one, which leads to the Badger. This one starts off with a very bad tier 5 AT2, which achieves the worst WN8 of only 605. It gets rapidly better with the AT8 on tier 6, which achieves 1167. The tier 7 AT7 is then one of the weaker TDs with only 810. And so is the AT15 with only 904. It is a bit better than the tier 7, but not superb on its tier. However, the Tortoise is superb. It is the second best tank destroyer currently on tier 9, performing nicely with an WN8 of 1456. And the tier 10 Badger achieves 1298. This tech tree line is also pretty consistent, and yeah, you should try it out if you are into playing heavily armored tank destroyers. The best light tank tech tree currently in World of Tanks is the French one, and no, it is not the one which leads to the EBR 105, but the one above it, which leads to the AMX 13105. This tech tree line achieves an overall WN8 of 1197. It starts off with the AMX ELC BIS, which achieves an astonishing 1580. The tier 6 AMX 12T is also superb, achieving 1568. The tier 7 one is also way above average with 1129. Now the tier 8 is a bit of the stinker of the line with 783. The tier 9 performs nicely with 1221, and so does the tier 10 one with 1341. So besides the tier 8 tank, this tech line is super consistent, and yeah, it is fun to play no matter on which tier you play. Once again, apart maybe from the tier 8 tank. The second best light tank tech tree line currently in the game is the British one, which leads to the Manticore. So this tech tree line achieves an overall WN8 of 1106. It starts off with the Covenanter. This tank can be considered as being OP. It achieves an average WN8 of 1965, so it is OP, and I made a video about this tank. It was kind of an introductory video of the new wheeled British medium tanks, so check it out. This tank is insane. The Crusader on tier 6 is on the weaker side with 920. Even worse is the Setter with only 773 WN8. The LHMTV gets a tiny touch better with 934. The GSOR achieves 1003, and then the Manticore is a pretty decent light tank with a WN8 of 1379. So it starts extremely OP, it gets worse. The stinkers are on tier 7 and tier 8, but then it gets much better, and the tier 10 tank is exceptionally good when it comes to spotting. Now, believe it or not, but the third best light tank tech tree line is the German one, which leads to the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen. This tank has also been buffed recently in World of Tanks and has a superb gun alongside with an outstanding mobility. So this tech tree line achieves an overall WN8 of 1086. It starts off with an ultra strong tier 5 tank, the Leopard, which achieves a WN8 of 1643. Then the tanks become a bit weaker with the VK2801 achieving 973. The tier 7 tank, the SP1C, achieves 917. I think it's mostly due to its very low shell travel time, or shell speed, I should say. In my opinion, this tank is super strong, but it seems that at least most of the player base does have problems playing this tank. The tier 8 tank achieves only 846, but then the tier 9 tank is much better, achieving 1022, and the tier 10, as I said, recently got buffed and achieves 1318. So just like the tech tree line of the Manticore, it starts great, the performance decreases, but then it increases from tier 9 onwards, and the tier 10 is actually fun to play and pretty competitive. The fourth best tech tree line when it comes to light tanks is the Chinese one, which leads to the WZ132. Now heads up, this tech tree will get buffed in the future, so it will become even better. As of now, it achieves a WN8 of 1080. And just like the other tech tree lines, it starts off with a pretty decent tier 5 tank, the Type T34, which I mentioned now a couple of times with its WN8 of 1210. The tier 6 tank achieves 1293, so way above average. Same goes for the WZ132 with 1200. Then the tier 8 is kind of the stinker in the line with 868. The tier 9 is a bit better, only a tiny touch with 948, and the tier 10 achieves 1210. So as those early tanks are not as OP as, for example, the German ones or the British ones, the drop on tier 8 is not as significant, and then it gets better at tier 9 and tier 10. However, the tier 10 is not as good as the previous tanks mentioned. And finally, number 5 on that list is the tech tree line which leads to the T110 LT. So this tech tree line achieves an overall WN8 of 1016. It starts off with the tier 5 tank, the 820, which achieves only 781. It is the worst tier 5 light tank in the game. The tier 6 is a tiny touch better with 1070. The tier 7 achieves 1048, so the tier 6 and tier 7 are actually performing nicely. The LTTB only achieves 708. In my opinion, or my subjective view, is that this tank is much better, but it looks like the overall statistic tells something different, and the average player does not achieve a good result in this tank. The tier 9 tank, the T54 lightweight, achieves 1069, so performs actually nicely, and the tier 10 achieves 1162, so it is a good tier 10 tank, but not as good as the other ones. Now I want to mention something, or I want to talk a bit about the French line which leads to the EBR 105. The reason why this tech tree line is performing so bad is not because of the tier 10 tank. This actually is a superb tank with a good WN8 of 1268, despite having been nerfed in the last couple of months. It still performs exceptionally good on tier 10. The problem of this tech tree is the tier 9 tank, the tier 8 tank, the tier 7 tank, and the tier 6 tank. And yeah, hey, I made a video about the overall best tech tree line, not about the best tank on each tier, and so I cannot recommend this tech tree line, and the other ones are simply better. And finally, when it comes to artillery, because some of you who like to play artilleries want to know which artillery tech tree line should I grind first. Well, the bad news is they all perform not so great in World of Tanks. I think this is due to the, yeah, I would say quite significant nerfs that Wargaming has given artillery systems in the game, and the distance or the delta between number 1 and number 5 is not that big. Nonetheless, the best tech tree line when it comes to artilleries is the American one, which leads to the T92 HMC. I will cut it short. It starts relatively bad on tier 5. It becomes better and better, and the reason why this tech tree is on first place is actually due to the nicely performing M53-M55 and the T92 HMC. The tier 9 achieves a WN8 of 1078, and the tier 10 achieves a WN8 of 1055, giving this tech tree once again an overall WN8 of 946. The second best one is the one which leads to the Object 261, so the Soviet one. Once again, it starts bad, it improves. The tier 8 achieves 906, the tier 9 986, and the tier 10 is actually the best RT, albeit with being only a tiny touch better than the American tier 10 one, with a WN8 of 1093, and so the overall WN8 of this tech tree line is 933. The second best is the British one, which leads to the Conqueror GC, with an overall WN8 of 891. This tech tree actually starts superb with the Bishop achieving a WN8 of 1182, a value which is not seen on any other artillery piece anywhere on any tier. But it becomes worse, not significantly. The stinker is the tier 8 tank. The tier 9 tank achieves 941, and the tier 10 tank 902. Number 4 is the German one, which leads to the GWE 100 with an overall WN8 of 891. And with an overall WN8 of 884. This tank is this tech tree line is simply slightly below average, basically on every tier. And then the worst one is the one which leads to the French Batchet 15558 with an overall WN8 of 799. Those artillery pieces all perform below average. The best one is the tier 6 one with 846. The tier 9 achieves 840, and then the tier 10 is also kind of a stinker, at least when it comes to the overall server statistics, with only 788. Now, some of you might say, well, Bruce, that is way too much information for me. Just give me the best 3 tech trees according to the overall result. Well, here it is. The very best tech tree is the TD tech tree line of the Chinese tech tree, so the one which leads to the WZ113GFT. This one has overall the best performance and the best result. Number 2 is the heavy tank tech tree, which leads to the T110E5 with an overall performance of 1392. And the third best one is the one which leads to the Super Congress, so the British heavy tech tree, with an overall performance of 1389. Alright guys, that was it for today with the video about the currently best tech trees in World of Tanks. Do you agree with what I presented? Do you have another favorite tech tree that has not been mentioned in this video? Just leave a comment in the comment section down below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Consider subscribing to my channel, and I see you next time in another World of Tanks video.